another edition of the Pucks with Haggs Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Joe Haggerty. You can find my work on joehaggerty.substack.com. Also, over the last month or so, writing for Boston Sports Journal. So you can check all of my NHL and Bruins thoughts, takes, writing at both of those sites. Plenty of Haggs to go around along with this Pucks with Haggs podcast. Today, I am welcomed by Conor Ryan from Boston.com. Longtime Bruins writer now. You're a veteran at this point, Conor. You're not a new kid anymore, right?
I know. I got a little gray on the side of my head now. I feel like I'm part of the crew now. So happy to be here.
You are. You're like Brandon Carlo, who has gone from like a young guy on the team to all of a sudden now a veteran and a leader and a guy that's been around the block a few times. So thank you very much for joining us. We got a lot of fun stuff to talk about today. Just a quick shout out to our sponsors, Fanduel Sportsbook. Visit fanduel.com/Boston and get right in the middle of the NHL season that's going on right now. $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Also, Factor Meals. We love them. Meals ready in 2 minutes. Delicious, healthy, chef made. My wife loves them because they're like 550 calories and they're delicious. Even the exotic sounding stuff that maybe I wouldn't like traditionally, I actually think is pretty good. So thank you, Factor Meals. Let's just jump into it with the Boston Bruins here. There's a lot to talk about, but just 8-0-1 after 9 games. And now they're starting to play divisional games, better teams. Like, I continue to be very impressed, blown away by what this team is doing. And now we're getting into like 10% of the season has been played. And Thanksgiving is coming, which is always the playoff marker. If you're in by Thanksgiving, you've got, percentage-wise, a really good chance to be in the postseason. That's only a few weeks away. I mean, we're talking about a team that's going to be a playoff team. Unless barring a like huge collapse at some point or major injuries like killing them, this is a team that I think we've got to like maybe change our expectations, certainly, and change the way we view them. And not be surprised by what we're seeing on a nightly basis with this team anymore.
Yeah, I think the esteemed Kevin Paul DuPont tweeted out something yesterday. I think the Bruins go 500 the rest of the way, and I think they'd still finish with 92 points, I want to say. So like they're 100%. Right. Yeah, even if they completely bottom out, they're still going to be right in the mix of being what I think maybe we thought they were going to be at the start of the year, which is like the last week, the last 2 weeks of the regular season. Are they a wild card team? They might be, locked into a second spot in the Atlantic right now if they play like this, or even first if they are better than Toronto. And I think you look at the way this team is built. I think it was easy to project that they were going to be in the mix just because the goaltending, the defense was going to be so strong. But I think the biggest question mark is, were you going to get enough offense? Were you going to get enough guys pulling on the rope? And again, I think last night's win over Florida is kind of a microcosm of the team. Like, it's not going to be pretty. I don't think you're going to see a lot of 60-minute efforts, but whether it's, fighting off that 5-minute penalty with, only 4 defensemen out there, these guys either have whatever you want to call it, the mettle, the fortitude they have to kind of grind through some of these wins. It's not going to be pretty most nights, but whether you have a guy like Pastrnak who can kind of carry you through long stretches of the regular season with how good he is offensively, or guys just chipping in here and there. You're not going to have Taylor Hall in your third line or anything like you had in years past, obviously. But when you have a defense and a goaltending that's so strong night in and night out, plus enough guys that I think can pull on the rope on various nights, you have a team that is able to, at the very least, for the regular season, can kind of pile on points steadily throughout the year, which is impressive to see considering how much they lost over the offseason.
Yeah, if you have in the NHL, if you have very good defense and very good goaltending, you're going to win games, and you're going to be better than the middle class. You're going to be better than certainly the cellar dwellers. You're going to be in the mix for a playoff spot all the time if those are your strengths of your team. And really, the offense determines how high up the scale you go as far as like contenders, playoff teams, and my only question with this team, and it does relate to the offense, is how much of a mental and physical grind it's going to be the way that they're going to have to win, because you see it night after night after night. There's not a big margin of victory when they win. They're winning a lot of 1-goal games. They're winning a lot of games where they've got a battle in the third period to get out with the 2 points or get pushed into overtime and have to win it there. And I think the taxing nature of playing that way. It's a tough way to live in the NHL if you're constantly just going to be 1 goal ahead, maybe 2 goals ahead of the other team in the third period, where they're just going to be throwing everything at you, thinking they still have a chance to win. So how much is that going to take out of them mentally, physically as the year goes on? Is that grind of having to play that way going to, take a little bit more out of them, take a bigger chunk out of them than maybe, certainly last year where it was, party time in the third period when they were blowing teams away with their depth and like going up by 3-4 goals. So like, that's my only question, is just having to play that way and live that way. How much is that going to wear on them? But like, they are showing an ability to do it, and they're going to continue to be able to do it because they don't beat themselves a lot of times because their strengths of their team. So I think you're right on. Like, they're going to be, I think, a top 3 team in the Atlantic Division. I don't think there's any question about that. We'll see what like Tampa's capable of once they get Vasilevsky back, what Florida's capable of once they get their players back. But I think by that point, the way the Bruins are playing, they're going to be so far back, they're not going to be able to catch the Bruins unless they completely fall on their face. So, it's going to be really interesting to watch, but they're just building themselves such a cushion right now that they're going to be able to handle some of the things that are coming their way a little bit later in the season.
Score early this NFL season with Fanduel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action, NFL. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including you got spreads, you get your player props, you got over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/Boston and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
Some news this week, obviously, and we'll talk a little bit more about the game, but first things first, Danton Heinen getting signed, ends up playing in that game last night. I think everybody was happy to see that on the team after he had, been doing the right things.
In limbo. Yeah,
going to practice for a month, like not really like, getting any guarantees that it was going to happen for him. And I've made the parallel before. It was similar to 2013 with Jay Pandolfo when he came in on a tryout. And I think it was like 11 or 12 or 13 games, something like that. It was a long time before they actually signed him to a contract where he was just sitting around practicing like, hey, I'd like to play, guys. It would be nice. Yeah. So just what you think of Heinen, the signing of him now, bringing him into the mix. What does this mean in the greater scheme of things for them? Does this mean Jesper Boquist is probably not going to be seen much this year? And, my feeling, they made a determination. They brought up Boquist. They brought up some other guys that they kind of had made promises to about NHL looks, Patrick Brown as well, and some other players that are also going to be in the mix for that. But I think they wanted to give each of those guys sort of their shot to play a game before they signed him. And then you go back and sign him and kind of commit to him as another player that they're going to give long looks for at the NHL level. And, on some level, he's going to get probably some kind of preferential treatment because Montgomery's got a history with him and he really likes him, having coached him before. And this guy's got a history with, all the players on the team. So he always had the in on those two certain things. But, I think he'll be a contributing member of this team, no doubt.
Yeah, I think I think the Bruins probably went through a pretty fair process with that, as you kind of mapped out, where, signed him. They were like, listen, we're going to put you in limbo a little bit here, but they wanted to see what they had in other guys like Boquist, who's played in the NHL, Brown, who Brown, a guy they signed the first day of free agency, who they probably thought was going to probably be their fourth line center going into the year before a guy like Beecher made a push during the preseason. But I think for Heinen, right, for a contract like that, making $775 for what he brings. Again, I don't know if he's a guy you want in there in the lineup every single day. I don't know if it's the same expectation you have for him maybe a few years ago when he's on that third line, but for what he's making, and I think what he can bring in terms of, he's a versatile player. You kind of know what you can expect out of him. Solid two-way guy, like not flashy. We all kind of know what Danton Heinen's game is, but if he's your 13th forward, injuries are going to inevitably happen. He can play on the fourth line, the third line. If you need him to bump up in the lineup for a game or two, like he has done that before with guys before. So yeah, I think when you look at just what the price is going to be for a guy like that, if he's your spare forward, I think that's actually a pretty solid spare forward for a guy that, again, didn't go in free agency. You're not really shelling out a lot of money to get him. So if that's his role and he can, pop in when needed, I don't see any harm in that for what he brings. Again, he's a guy that has not a very high ceiling, but his floor is a guy that I think you can definitely work with if you have him as your extra guy on an NHL roster.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the fact that he has, in the last couple of years, really worked on his 200-foot game, worked on playing at both ends of the ice, become a viable defensive player, as well as, when he kicks in offense occasionally, and what he was known for earlier in his career. And, coming out of college, that we weren't sure what his offensive upside was going to be, if it was going to be higher than it was. And his first season in the NHL was really good offensively too. So kind of figuring out where his identity is, but being able to play in all situations, being a guy that's not going to be a liability in any way, shape, or form when he's out there in a third or a fourth line role, and kind of willing to play to that sort of identity if he has to. I think all that stuff makes him a really good fit. And to your point, he can kick in offense occasionally, probably more than some of those other players.
Right.
Like Jesper Boquist, I'll be honest with you. And I talked about this with Mark Diver on the podcast last week. I watched him in training camp. I've seen him now in games. I really have not seen much of anything out of him. Nothing that's made him stand out or impress me. Certainly I know Heinen. I think Heinen's a better player. Patrick Brown, I think, is a useful penalty killer and, can win faceoffs and, will help them when they have injuries. But I was of the opinion when they signed him, he looks, feels, smells like a 13th forward to me. I think that's the kind of guy.
Yeah.
And when you see him play, his skating speed is not up to pace with everybody else. And he struggles to keep pace with everybody. And he looks kind of like an AHL player that, is going to kind of bounce back and forth and just doesn't have the skating speed to really, stick at the NHL level, along with the, the offensive capabilities either. So I think also Heinen's probably the best option. When they looked at all these players and said, which one of these guys is going to be the best fit as far as playing sometimes, being able to play up, being a 13th forward, I think he's definitely the best. So I think it's a solid signing by him. The other part of this equation is the signing of Danton Heinen. That was one domino to fall. Now we talk about Matt Poitras. He played his 9th game, and maybe one of his toughest games last night, where you still see the puck possession, you still see the creativity. I thought in a game that was extremely physical, was very intense, was like a heavyweight Atlantic Division playoff style game, I thought he still fared okay, and he looked like he belonged. But he also bad turnover to Barkov behind the net that led to one of the goals. He struggled in the faceoff circle. He was pushed. There's no question about it. But I think, and it's interesting that the Bruins are playing coy now, not wanting to be too effusive in the praise, not guaranteeing him a spot at this point or saying it's a done deal. Even Brad Marchand just basically saying he made the best case for himself. Seems like they're being, they're walking the fence as far as not confirming anything or not giving him that roster spot before the team makes the announcement. And I wonder why that is or where that's coming from. But me watching the situation, me watching him play, me watching him the way the roster is made up with him on it, the way it allows them to, they don't have Taylor Hall in the third line, like you said, but if he's here and he's playing a top 6 role, you can move Charlie Coyle to the third line center spot. And I think that does help return them to some level of having a deeper lineup, and having everybody slot where they should slot. And it kind of starts bringing back a little bit of last year, especially in some of those games where it was a third line of Coyle, Van Riemsdyk, and Frederick. That was outstanding. I thought that was, when you were watching that, you're like, wow, they're really starting to get to a point where the depth is good again. And is really something you can look at and say that might be a strength against other teams. Obviously, it's predicated on Poitras being able to handle a top 6 center role night in and night out. And I think he played 18 plus minutes last night, which is a lot for a kid, especially in a game like that. But everything I've seen out of him, everything I've seen out of the 9 games, knowing that he dominated in golf last year, you put it all together, I don't think there shouldn't even be a question that he's on this team, that he's earned his NHL spot, and he's going to be with the Bruins for a long, long time. And they're going to sell a lot of number 51 jerseys with Poitras on the back. So I think from a business standpoint, from a winning standpoint, from a development standpoint, as far as Poitras goes, I think it all makes sense and all signs point towards him being on this team. But I just wonder, and I ask you, like, can you think of any reason why they're being, they're sort of tiptoeing through this at this point, and why there should even be any question as to whether he's like, I guess the only thing I wonder is, like, is there some kind of salary cap thing that's a problem with keeping him, that is going to turn into an issue for the Bruins, and that's why some of this is going on. Like, that's the only thing I can even think of. Yeah. But other than that, I don't know why he wouldn't be on this team.
Right. Yeah. I think that's the only possible thing, could be something related to the cap, which if that's the case, then I'm sure Evan Gold and the cap gurus are like crunching the numbers nonstop.
Well, they got to figure something out, right?
Right. Because otherwise there's absolutely no reason, as you said. I mean, beyond
they're going to get crushed though. Like, if it turns into a thing where, like, for some stupid salary cap issue,
right,
he can't be on the team, like, they are going to get crushed by everybody. And it doesn't matter if you stop praising him now or not. Like, yes. Bruins fans are smart. Bruins media are smart. We see what we see. We see a kid that clearly should be on this team and deserves to be on this team. And if you can't figure it out, you're going to get hammered from all sides.
Right. I mean, you look at his overall game. He's already a guy that I think looks like he belongs. As you said, had a tougher game against Florida, which, again, so did, I think, every single guy on the Bruins, especially in that first period. It's the same thing we saw last year in the playoffs. Like, that Florida forecheck is impressive when they're kind of barreling down on you. But you look at the way he's played, whether it's just the baseline production. You talk to a few of the guys on the team and how impressed they are with just his puck protection, how he's able to shield the puck, avoid kind of putting himself in bad spots where you're getting a lot of costly turnovers. Those are things you can't really teach, right? You can have, I look at like a guy like Arthur Kaliev, a few years ago when he had like a great wrist shot, led to a few goals, but then he wouldn't back check. Like, any guy that's offensively skilled can put themselves on a highlight reel off of a great wrist shot or a great saucer pass. Not a lot of guys can do what Poitras does at his age, of protecting the puck, not being a liability, and building the team game, which he's kind of done night in, night out. So in terms of his individual contributions, he deserves a spot. But as you said, the Bruins can't afford to send him down to the OHL. No. Like, they are a better team with him out there. I mean, he's a guy that, as you're trying to find that cohesion, that chemistry, that consistent 5-on-5 scoring, he's one of the few guys that's kind of driving play regularly, and it's all him just doing the little things that it's impressive for a 19-year-old, right? Like, he's protecting the puck, he's cutting inside into like that grade A ice and generating chances. And as you said, having him out there, I think, allows you to build kind of the framework of what I think you want in your lineup with a guy like Charlie Coyle on the third line. Like, when Coyle's playing at his best, and I don't know what it is, but him and Frederick always play really well together. You all of a sudden have kind of a physical puck possession, maybe not physical, but a puck possession, hefty kind of line that can do a little bit of everything, be kind of your shutdown line, all those things. And, if Poitras is able to drive play further up the lineup, and it's whether it's with, he played with Zacha and Pastrnak the last game. He's had some good looks with Morgan Geekie, which is a guy that you want to get going as well. And if both those guys can play off each other, that's impressive. Like, however way you map it out, the Bruins team, it's not just like, a tip of the cap to a 19-year-old who I think has accelerated his timeline. Like, he obviously deserves to play up here full time. Bruins need him. That's the most important thing. Like, right now, this 19-year-old kid is a key cog on this team, not for the future, but for right now during this season.
Yeah, and that's it. Like, the bottom line is, like, they're not doing Matt Poitras any favors. They need him. Like, he makes them a much better team when he's basically exactly what they needed, the answer to their prayers. Like, that, not that they, he's the answer to their prayers because he came out of nowhere, because they drafted him. They clearly saw talent there, and credit to the Bruins scouts. And, like, I've always been on them to draft more OHL players, more Canadian junior players, because those are the guys that every year when a team wins the Stanley Cup, the vast majority of the players on those teams are always OHL Canadian junior players. Like, OHL, sometimes from Quebec, obviously from the Dub sometimes, but they're coming from Canadian junior leagues and predominantly from the OHL. And the Bruins have sometimes been light in the draft on taking those kids. So I think they could look at this and say, you know what, this should be more impetus for us and more firepower and ammunition for us to go and take more of those kids, because that, that's something to get a focus on. And I say this as, somebody that's very involved in youth hockey around here. I love that they draft and sign local kids. I love that they go after college players. I love that that's like a talent stream that they continually mine out of, and they should do that. But they also need to focus a lot more on Canadian kids, because that's what you do when you have to win games and when you need to get the best players out there. So credit to them for finding him, for drafting him. But the fact that he was ready right now is like a gift from the hockey gods dropped into their lap. It's exactly what they needed. And if for any reason they have to shy away from that, turn away from that, send him back to golf to get 150 points this year, what's the
congratulations
point? Yeah, exactly. It should not happen. So, and I guess in thinking about it, maybe part of the reason they're trying to scale back the talk too is because maybe there's some trade things that are out there and they're trying to sort of play poker a little bit with whether they want to keep him or not.
Yeah.
But I don't really think they're going to fool anybody there either. You know what I mean? Everybody knows they want to keep him. And everybody knows the Bruins are against the cap. You're not going to fool anybody, I think, at this point, if you're the Boston Bruins.
Maybe they just don't want a bunch of networks to put a microphone in his face every day, like Connor Bedard. Maybe that's what they're trying to do. Trying to maybe cool down the hype train a little bit. So we'll see.
I think the hype train has left the station, Connor.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Couple other things out of that game, and this could also play into some of the difficulty, and we've seen this around the NHL with other teams, where at times they've had challenges icing a full team. That sometimes they have to go, short of D, short of forward, because of injuries, because of the salary cap. When it's hit certain teams at certain points, Matt Grzelcyk goes out with an upper body injury that he's going to miss a couple of weeks. Luch is already out of the lineup. They're missing Lauko. Some of that stuff is starting to accumulate there. You wonder if they're going to hit a point where the salary cap is going to be an issue with them and all the injured players that they have, as far as icing a full team. And I'm curious to see how this is going to play out with their defensemen. Now that Grzelcyk's out for a couple of weeks, and Charlie McAvoy is likely facing some kind of discipline and suspension for the headshot on Oliver Ekman-Larsson after last night. To me, that was a clear cut headshot. Whether he meant to do it or not, whether it was intentional or not, I don't think it really matters. The puck wasn't there. He clearly clipped him in the head. And I think, in addition to the match penalty that got him tossed from the game, he's probably going to miss a game or two after that. So this puts them in a really difficult spot the next few games, both from a depth standpoint and from a roster standpoint and from a salary cap standpoint. And I'm really interested to see how all this is going to play out amidst the backdrop of just signing Heinen, of now making the decision on Poitras. It seems like a lot of things are coming to a head, and it may be a difficult couple of games to navigate for the next few for the Boston Bruins.
Yeah, no, it's definitely tough, and it's too bad that you're losing so many key guys, especially I think during these games that were litmus tests, right? I think you missed a guy like Lucic in that Florida game. That's the one where you'd really just see kind of the pushback he could bring. I'm sure the way that first period was going, I have to imagine there was going to be a big hit or something that would have at least gotten the crowd going a little bit there. And even with this Toronto game against Ryan Reeves and a Toronto team, I think is clearly
tried to beat. That's a good point.
Clearly try to, I think, beef up their lineup a little bit. This would have been a great test there. Even guys like Lauko, who, Lauko is not a heavyweight fighter by any means, but kind of knows how to read the room, right, and knows when to try to interject some energy in there. So that's kind of unfortunate in terms of just you're missing, I think, that element that I think the Bruins are really trying to maybe add more to their game this year when you look at the guys they signed. But yeah, in terms of just the bodies back there, that's going to be the biggest issue, is not just the, who they bring up, but whether it's, are you looking at guys like Ian Mitchell or Zaboral? Are you looking at, is Lohrei ready for a look? Which seems like, I know Dibs talked a little bit about him on your last podcast of what he's done down there so far, but the cap is the looming thing over all of that is, what exactly moves can you even make when you have those opportunities? Because it does look like at the very least, you're not going to have McAvoy for that Toronto game, which makes an uphill battle even tougher without a guy like him out there.
Yeah, and just looking ahead, you're right, with the games coming up with Toronto is a big one. I think that's you circle and look at and say that's like a true test game. That's going to be interesting with the lesser lineup. But how much do you think we should read out of the results of that game. I was impressed by the Bruins last night, kind of avoiding any revenge talk and sidestepping that whole thing and basically saying it's not going to change what happened last year as far as that game. And I just think at the end of the day, that win over Florida was just their highest quality win of the season. And the biggest win as far as sort of confirming and minting them as a true legit team, like a legit quality team in the NHL. Where they went up against so many Western Conference cream puffs in the first few weeks, and it was hard to say that, when they were winning those games. But I think that game against Toronto was another one that is going to be in the measuring stick, kind of like, this is where this team is at. This is the statement to the rest of the league that the Bruins are legit and for real. Anything that you're sort of like looking forward to watching or reading into in that game coming up, which is they're always entertaining and fun rivalry games.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at obviously Toronto's, their whole game revolves around that offense, which is tough to corral. So I think obviously seeing how, again, the Bruins, I think, have done a good job. You look at even like Detroit was flying high. They had a really strong power play. They were 0 for 4 in that game. Like they've done a really good job at shutting down the strengths of teams, especially on the offensive zone. So if they can, again, easier said than done, but slowing down Toronto's offense would be a big key for them, even without a guy like McAvoy. We'll see if maybe, again, Hampus Lindholm played his best hockey last year when McAvoy was out of the lineup, and he kind of was the do-it-all guy. So I think getting him going, especially in the offensive zone, would be a huge plus for them. But I think for me, the biggest thing moving forward, and it's what we talked about earlier on, Joe, is the ceiling of this team depends on how much offensive generation they can get, and you're still trying to see where those pieces fall into place. I mean, it feels like every single game now, Montgomery is shuffling up his lines that I don't even know what are his lines right now in terms of, what's the best case or who fits where. So seeing that continue to build, see where a guy like Poitras settles in, whether they think he's with Zacha and Pastrnak, whether they think he's with Geeky, all those things, I think is something worth noting. And if guys like him, I think a guy like Jake DeBrusk, you need to get him going. You need that more 5-on-5 scoring punch. Those are the things that I think are the most important thing. I think we know night in, night out, you'll have the odd game, maybe not as disastrous as that Anaheim game, but you're going to have the odd game where they give up 3 or 4 goals. But I think the biggest thing is, their defense and goaltending is going to be pretty strong night in and night out. It's whether or not the offense can continue to extend leads, build themselves some breathing room, those things. So I think that's what you have to watch moving forward, especially against Toronto. That I don't know what happened with Joseph Wall, but he's been unbelievable out of the gate. So
yeah, and that's like basically that's really what the Leafs needed, and that's what they were missing is something like that. And that makes them a more complete team if they can have somebody that consistently can just, stand in there and stop pucks and do what needs to be done and, be the backbone for that team. Because obviously they have the offensive firepower. They've had that for years. And it's going to be an interesting game. I like you lament the loss of Lucic for that game, because I was looking forward to Lucic Reeves making a statement to each other in the first game that they were going to play. I think it's a classic, though, like strength against strength, matchup, offensive firepower, dynamic run and gun hockey from Toronto, defense and goaltending for the Bruins. Yes, they're going to be definitely missing a bunch of players, I think, a bunch of key guys. But I still think they have the ability to play the way that they want to play. It's going to be another Hampus Lindholm, probably 28 to 30 minute spectacular, like it was in that game against Florida. He logged a lot of ice time. Carlo and Forbort were over 23 minutes too, and that's asking a lot out of all of those guys. But that's the way it's going to go, I think, until they get Grzelcyk and McAvoy back. So I think that's going to be a really good game. As far as the odd game, I agree. Like, you're going to have games like Anaheim, especially like when the schedule sort of like hits you with the almost scheduled loss feel kind of game that you thought going into it that was going to be anyway. I actually was impressed by the way that they played in that game, just given the situation, coming back from a West Coast trip with multiple time changes. First game back is usually a hot mess. I thought they almost pulled it off.
Exactly.
Hot mess came out in the last 5 minutes of the game. But I liked that against Detroit a couple nights later, they were pretty much in the exact same situation, and they're going to be in that situation a lot this year. 2-1 game in the third period. They gave up the goal, and all of a sudden Detroit is really coming at them. with everything they have, feeling like they're going to be able to do what Anaheim did. And then Pastrnak steps up and makes a few plays. And, that's what you're going to need is something like that. But I thought it was really important and encouraging that you saw the Bruins respond in a totally different way the second time around against Detroit, against another, good team that's playing really, really good hockey this year, and be able to win that game. And then find ways to get through it. Like, I think that's, the sign of a good team. And I really liked, just like at the end, the way Pastrnak got rewarded for making the right play off the boards to clear the puck with the net. Like, exactly what Jim Montgomery had been talking about the previous game that they were not doing and that they did wrong, and that was a problem when the net was empty. Instead, he does the right thing. He clears the puck off the boards, banks it off the boards, and like the hockey gods make sure it trickles into the net. Like, that's getting rewarded for making the right plays and doing the right thing. And that is really good to see. And again, in the game against Florida, after the first period, they all talked about it after the game was over. They made an adjustment. They were trying to be too fancy going through the middle of the ice with the passing and the transition plays to try to get zone entries. And it was very obvious to watch. You could see it during the game, where it just turned it into a dump and chase game, where they were just throwing pucks from deep in the neutral zone once they got over the red line behind the Florida net, and then just like attacking them with forecheckers. And it's, meat and potatoes hockey. It's boring hockey. It's not like what they want to play, but you knew it was going to be effective, and it was the proper adjustment, and the Bruins bought in and adjusted exactly the way they were supposed to. Really, one of the only times after the first period that they did anything, through the middle of the neutral zone that was at all, fancy was Zacha hitting Pastrnak on the run, full speed, when they went in and scored on the McAvoy goal. That was one of the few times they even attempted that. Most of the time, they were just like blinders on, throwing the puck cross corner dump and go get it with the forecheckers. So like, I'm also, I think Jim Montgomery this year is being forced to do more coaching, and forced, as like you mentioned, changing up the lines all the time, like making all of these adjustments, like doing things a little bit differently with the crew that he has. And we're seeing even more, I think, out of him from a coaching standpoint. And, probably going to end up being in an even more Jack Adams worthy effort that he's going to put in this year than last year with the horses that he had, that he's going to have to work behind the bench. But I'm even getting more impressed watching Jim Montgomery this year in a much more challenging situation for him than he was put in last year with that Bruins team.
Yeah, I mean, you look at last year, how many times did he mention, the opportunity that he kind of was able to walk into a locker room that was commanded by so many guys that have been there forever, like Bergeron and Marchand Krejci. And, he's mentioned Bergeron countless times before, how he was almost an extension of the coaching staff, right? He was almost the go-to liaison you can kind of lean to in terms of getting kind of the temperature of the room. And it's not to say that is now completely gone and that, Marchand's closing the door on these guys, but it's definitely impressive to see him, switch things up a lot more. And I think adjust on the fly. This is a team that I think Jim Montgomery wants them to play with pace, wants them to be a lot more shot selective. But when you've got a team that also maybe doesn't have as much finishing talent, or you're still trying to find the cohesion, maybe it's about simplifying things. Maybe it's about just getting pucks on net and letting guys like James and Rinkside get, opportunities at the net front. Like, it's all about, I think what makes a good coach is when you have a set game plan, you have a way that you want your team to play, but it's also hockey. Shit happens, and you have to adjust it on the fly and work with what you have. And hopefully you're able to have your team build into what I think your overall vision is for that roster, right? I think that's what makes a good coach is kind of envisioning that and getting to that product maybe by the end of the year. But it's always a work in progress for every single team. So to have him do that and switch things up and, maybe change – and stray from kind of the strengths of what he thinks his roster is, just to get them to where they are right now and incorporate that more and more. Yeah, that has been really impressive in terms of how he's worked with the team that, again, I don't think a lot of us expected them to be in a spot. I don't think anyone expected 8-0-1, but he's definitely coaching a team that at the very least looks like they're going to be right in the middle of the playoff picture this upcoming spring.
We do have Factor Meals to help us out. America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit when it does get busy, when it does get crazy, when we do need a quick meal. They fuel you up fast with flavorful and nutritious ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. Takes less than 2 minutes to cook them. They're fresh, never frozen, meals ready in 2 minutes, like I said. They have calorie-conscious options, going upscale with some of the things they're offering now, like surf and surf meal options, roasted garlic filet mignon, and shrimp and Cajun spiced shrimp and salmon, which is like right in my wheelhouse. This is the kind of stuff I'm all about. So it's got everything for everybody. There's 34 plus chef prepared, dietitian approved weekly options for meals. You can get snacks, you can get breakfast items. Like it's a great deal. So if you want to get Factor meals, go to factormeals.com/Haggs50 and use the code Haggs50 to get 50% off of your first box. It's a great deal. I've tried it. It's fantastic. I recommend it to you. We love these ready to make meal kits, especially when we're on the go with our kids. So one more time, that's factormeals.com/Haggs50 to get 50% off your first box. You won't be sorry if you go to Factor Meals. It gets the Haggs thumbs up seal of approval.
Anything, Connor, as we're closing out here, that you are hot on, that you have a take on, that you haven't talked about, that you want to put out there, that you've seen over the first month with this Bruins team that you think is not being discussed enough?
I'll probably just go back to what I said about, the fact that Lucic and these guys aren't playing and how tough that is. And I think it's something that you go down that rabbit hole of like, this team needs grit, and you get dismissed by a lot of people as to what that means or what that brings to a team. But I think you've seen it with, you can view and see how valuable those guys are just in terms of the extra energy they provide, the deterrence it is with having a guy like Lucic out there. I guarantee you that against the game against Florida, instead of Frederick, maybe Poitras skating a few shifts with Lucic instead. Like, I think you see that energy and the extra, I think, oomph you get from having those guys in the lineup. Even a guy like Lauko, like those guys just make things happen. And I think that's the kind of the perfect blend of what you need in teams is, that high end skill. But if you have guys that can, inject energy, make things happen. I mean, even look at like Florida, all these teams that have a really strong forecheck, can close in on you quickly and can make things happen and kind of muck things up, usually do pretty well in the playoffs. I think the Bruins have seen that. Like, you need, a lot more skill injected into your roster in today's NHL. We all know that, but finding that fine blend is something I think the Bruins were kind of missing. I think you've seen it so far with guys like Lucic and Lauko, and you just hope those guys are back soon. Because I think it's obviously fun having those guys out there. You love hearing the Luch chants and all those things, but that added element, I think, has been very, very noticeable in those games you've seen him out there.
Yeah, I agree. And, that is like a great observation just as far as the fourth line goes, that like you now understand why Lauko and Lucic and Beecher won those roles out of training camp. Like, and you did then because you saw how well they were playing. But like seeing some of the other guys in those spots on that fourth line, the fourth line's just not nearly as effective right now with the people that they're missing as it was when they had Beecher centering Lauko and Lucic. And that was a strength, and that was something you noticed. I remember opening night, they were outstanding. And like there was a few games where they were factors, and pretty much every night they were bringing physicality, energy, and they were disruptive. And they really were doing a very good job more often than not. And, I think the fourth line's much less of a factor right now with some of the other players that are in there. And certainly, on a whole different level, the presence of Lucic just is a game changer for everybody. It makes everybody more courageous. It makes everybody have a little more physical swagger. It makes everybody braver because they know he's going to have their back. You do have the ability to with him. He's a guy that at times they will play up in the lineup a little bit because he's done it before in his past, and he knows how to play that role. And he knows, he's a very underrated, I think, playmaker and passer, and he's very good at, hitting guys in good spots. And he did it multiple times in the preseason and the regular season where he found skill guys in the right place to set them up to do their thing. Whether it was Pasternak, whether it was setting up Mason Lowry in the preseason with a great pass, like he's underrated doing that. And he has the ability to play with higher end offensive players, because even though if he's sometimes can struggle to keep up with them skating speed wise, like that's fine with a big, cruiserweight like that, that's going to happen. But when he gets there and he has the puck, he can set guys up, and he's always been able to do that, going back to his days playing with Nathan Horton and David Krejci. So, and he obviously the net front thing is a part of his toolbox as well when he's playing with those kind of players. So, I agree. Definitely missing Lauko and Lucic takes a big chunk out of the fourth line as far as just their ability to have an impact. So hopefully they do come back sooner rather than later. And great that Lauko was lucky and nothing serious happened there where what we've seen with tragic skate blade issues and things that have happened where it's coming more and more of a conversation in the hockey community about neck guards and about Kevlar protection all over from skate blades that are coming up high. For him that was millimeters away from doing real damage to him, and for him to be able to come out the next day with a Lord of the Rings tweet,
of course,
I thought was pretty awesome, and it's why I get along with him. It's I love going over and just talking to him about new MCU shows, that's going on. That's total comic book geek sci-fi crap because he's all into it and he knows what's going on with all of that stuff.
He's a pro too. I was talking.
Oh yeah, he is.
I like the Lord of the Rings movies, and he'll be you read the extended chapters of the Tolkien. I was no, I don't know any of that stuff, man. That is beyond what I'm investing in. So kudos to you for doing that. But I'm not reading any Tolkien novel. No, I'm not doing that.
He's in deep, and I appreciate that. Anybody that is a professional athlete is that level, and also has the ability to be a complete fantasy, sci-fi, comic book geek at the same time. Is my hat's off to you. You are a well-rounded Renaissance man, and that's what Jacob Lauko is. So I'm glad to see he's going to be all right, and that he avoided any kind of serious injury there. That's it for us this week. Thank you very much, Connor, for being with me. I appreciate it. We'll do this again down the road sometime soon. Thank you for listening to the Pucks with Haggs podcast. Thank you to our sponsors, Factor Meals, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, ready in 2 minutes or less. Go to factormeals.com/Haggs50. Actually, you probably just want it to be 2 minutes. If it's less than 2 minutes, it might be undercooked. So put it in the microwave for 2 minutes. Head to factormeals.com/Haggs50 and use code Haggs50 to get 50% off your first box. And let's also thank Fanduel.com, Fanduel Sportsbook, Fanduel.com/Boston. The NFL and the NHL seasons are in full swing. Get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you make a $5 bet. Win or lose, spreads, player props, over-unders, so much more. So thank you to FanDuel Sportsbook. Conor Ryan, once again, thank you very much. We will see you at practice a little bit later today. We